It's lovely to have your company. You might have just heard that little recording in progress. We are recording this session so that we can share it with everyone as a replay later. So thank you for being here. My name's Morag Gamble and I'm from the Permaculture Education Institute, and many of you are here because you're also part of the Permaculture Educators Program. So hello to all of you, and it's lovely to have your company here. I'm calling in from the rainy, cloudy lands of Gubbi Gubbi today, and I know other people who are from this part of the world are also. I'm hoping that the rain will hold and internet will be stable tonight. I apologise to those of you who were set up to watch it last time, and my internet just completely dropped out. So thank you for your patience, and it's lovely that you could join us again here today. So I'm just going to share my screen. And maybe while I'm doing that, if you'd like to just open up the chat below, which you'll find down in your little sort of, what do you call it, menu down below, you'll find the little chat bubble. Open that up and start to let us know where you're calling in from. So maybe drop in your name and yeah, where you are. It's lovely to hear where people are from all around the world and what country you're on in Australia as well, what Indigenous lands you're on. So let me just share my screen while you're doing that, and then we can continue. So the session today that I wanted to share with you is this. It's 5 reasons why the world needs more permaculture. Now, let's just begin by deconstructing that title for a moment. 5 reasons the world needs more permaculture. So what do we mean by the world? Often when we hear that, we can kind of get a little bit overwhelmed. It's like, oh, it's something so huge and so big. It's not something I can actually have any impact on doing. The world can mean many different things. And I wonder, what does your permaculture world look like? Perhaps it's, when we talk about the world, it could be talking about the planet. It could be talking about the climate, like what's going on with the climate. We could be talking about global humanity. This is the world. We could be talking about the global economy or a local economy. We could be talking about the web of life, the ecosystems. Your world could also be your home. That is the heart and soul of your world that wraps you and brings you into your everyday life with such, love and compassion. There's your world, there's our worlds, there's my world. So I think it's really important to really take into consideration this concept of what we mean by the world, but also to recognize that all of these things that I just mentioned are all one and the same. Because in your home and in your world, there is the climate, there is humanity, there is planetary systems, there is ecosystems. And when you look at the planet also impacts your home. So there's all these nested systems. And I think it's really absolutely important to think about how these all interact, but not to be overwhelmed too by the fact that when we talk about the world, that it's a big thing. We can influence our world. Like, how does our world need more permaculture? So I wonder, maybe just drop in the chat, like, what does your permaculture world look like? And how possibly might you think that it might benefit from more permaculture? So I'd love for you to interact here. I'm really encouraging you this time, rather than just to sit back and relax, which you can do. You can totally do that. But I would love for you to participate, to lean in on this conversation, and then to keep reading the chat too and think about what other people are writing. Because it's when we start to explore these concepts together, we get a sense of a wholeness. We get a sense of other dimensions and other perspectives of how we can actually show up in the world today, in our worlds in order to make a difference. And so continuing this concept of deconstructing the topic of 5 reasons the world needs more permaculture. So what do we mean by more permaculture? Well, permaculture has been around for 50 years or so, and it's in most countries around the world. You can go to pretty much every country in the world and there will be permaculture people practicing. There'll be some kind of localized form of permaculture, even whether it's an ancient indigenous form of permaculture, or whether it's people who've taken the ideas they've heard, wrapping around the world and landing it and localizing it somehow in their way. And so what I mean by we need more permaculture, of course, we need more regenerative practices in the world, but we also need to really look at how we can take it and expand the number of voices in this. Like, what does it mean to you? What does it mean in your particular place, in your particular community? What does permaculture mean there? And we need to take those threads, your thread, the next person's thread, the next person's thread, and weave that into what permaculture means, because there's no one way that it looks like. It is so uniquely relevant to your place, to your context, to your community, to your needs, to the influences in your place. And this is what I think is the absolute heart of why permaculture is so key, is that it is totally adaptable, and it needs to be adapted to where you are. There's a set of principles and ethics and strategies and ideas, but it's when it gets localized rather than cookie cutted across the world that it actually makes sense. So I really do see that this part of having more permaculture is more voices, more threads in the weave, more localization, and more communication and teaching and sharing of those local ways. So this is what I mean. So I wonder too whether you wanted to respond to this question at the bottom, like, where do you think that we need more permaculture? So in your local area, where do you see the gaps? Where do you see the possibilities? And what's your particular thread? How do you show up with permaculture? I'm sure that you all have very unique ways of expressing permaculture. It might be something in your home, in your local community, in your school, in your business, in your job, wherever it is that you are, that it shows up differently. So I'd love to hear about how that happens for you. So let me just start this concept of the 5 reasons why. So I wanted to share with you 5 reasons I'm thinking that the world needs more permaculture. I was in a conversation the other day with a group of people who I get together with regularly. So I find it really valuable, and you might also find it really valuable to gather together with a group of people that really nourish your soul, who are doing things in your world that you really admire, and you all have this sort of co-admiring going on. You're really looking up to each of these people, think, I really love what you're doing and how you're showing up. So we all get together, every 6 weeks or so and have a chat and see what's going on. We can talk about what we need help with, where we feel like things are working, where they're not, and help each other. It's like a really great community of practice. Anyway, one of the things that we were talking about was this, that how do we live when the ground is constantly shifting and changing? And how do we show up, and how do we make decisions when this is going on? Like, what we knew last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago is different from what's going on now. And so when the world is changing, and when it looks like there's going to be continuing dramatic shifts and change, like, things always change, yes, but things are changing so rapidly now that we never feel like we have a solid footing. So this is one of the things that I think is really important of why we need more permaculture, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I just want to go through the 5 reasons first. I think also one of the things that I think is really big is this vision, the vast gap that exists between our vision and reality. So we have big ideas about what we want to see happen in the world. We want there to be cohesiveness. We want there to be good design. We want there to be regenerative practices. We want there to be sustainable food systems. This is what, we imagine can be possible. But yet the gap between what we want and what we see in front of us seems to be so broad. And what this brings is kind of fear and anxiety, sometimes like even a sense of mourning, what we thought was there, but it's not actually. And with that comes like a sense of sadness and sometimes a grasping. And we're seeing this play out across the planet at the moment. I mean, just open the news, any day, and we'll see this grasping for resources, this acting from a place of fear. So I wonder, is there, where in your world, as I described when we're talking about the world, like it could be in your local community, or it could be something you're noticing bigger, where are you noticing this gap because we all notice differently. What you notice is different from what I notice, which is different from what another person in this call is noticing. And so this is why I think it's really important to be in conversation, because it's when we start to see each other's different perspectives, we get a bigger sense of the whole and what's possible. So I'd love to hear about, where are you noticing a gap, and how does that even make you feel, and how are you addressing that? So make sure that as you're dropping in your comments into the chat too, that you're thinking about, have a read of what other people are saying. So another thing that I think is a really big issue in terms of why the world needs more permaculture is the fact that there's no more business as usual. The conventional responses are not working in the polycrisis. They're saying, you can't solve the problems using the same thinking that got us here in the first place. So what new approaches are we seeing that are working? And I often find that a permacultural way of thinking and designing and opening up to these possibilities and really looking at what is the situation can help us to design our way out of this. But I think it's really important to start with this recognition of these things that I'm mentioning, because unless we do, we can tinker around the edges, but not actually put our finger on where the real issues lie. And it really does also give us the opportunity to think about how we might show up and communicate what's going on in a different way. Because if we show up into our community projects and our local permaculture group and just keep tinkering and talking about the edges and never get to the middle, there's this churning that's going on underneath in the unseen layer of the conversations that is impacting everything that's going on without it ever being spoken about or pointed at. And so I think it's just really, really good to acknowledge this. And whether you end up speaking about it or not, or just whether you show up differently because you know about it and you've thought about it, is actually going to make a huge difference. Now, this one's not a really easy one to stomach, and it's always a challenging one to stomach, that things are getting worse. Every time you open up another scientific report or another global, ecosystems report, you hear that things are getting worse. Every time you look at what's going on in a forest or a Indigenous community or something, you hear about things that are getting worse. I just opened up the other day, well, actually today, and there's a massive bleaching of some more coral. And yesterday I was noticing about how there was an article about how all the kelp forests around Tasmania have been lost in a lifetime. We just keep hearing this, and I watch with dread with the melting Antarctic. There's just so much going on, and not to mention even the changes in politics and the amount of war that's in the world, and all of these things that are happening that are not disconnected. They are all part of the same polycrisis. So we are in for a bumpy ride. So I wonder too, what kind of bumps are you already negotiating? Maybe you're already experiencing some kind of climate impact, floods or droughts or fires. Maybe there's an economic crisis that's hit you. Maybe there's something else. Like, what are those bumpy rides that you're seeing in your part of the world? Because it's different in different places. But let's just keep in mind that they are actually part of this one collective polycrisis that is a result of the current way in which we're showing up on the planet. But what I think is really important too, another reason why the world needs more permaculture, is that the permaculture is based on these core ethics of care. And if there's anything that we need in this world more today than anything else, is more care. We need to be caring for the planet, caring for each other, and redistributing the surplus. And so I like to reframe these phrases, the earth care, people care, fair share, in these words. So we need more regeneration, ecological regeneration, bioregional regeneration, regeneration of soils, regeneration of water systems and catchments. And, so the heart of regeneration, I think, is a core part of what permaculture is about. And in terms of the people care dimension of permaculture, I think it's deeply about respect. that we show up with this deep respect for one another and for our differences and for our similarities as well. And how can we, if we show up with this sense of people care and deeply respecting one another, what difference is that going to make? Just simply that, without even changing without even saying anything, we just change our perception and how we enter into a space. It's remarkable what can happen there. And the other thing that I think is really important to consider is this notion of fair share, because the world is fracturing in terms of the haves and the have-nots, and it gets further and further stretched the further this economic project is going on. And so one of the things that I love about permaculture and what we need so much more of is this reciprocity, this giving, being in the state of giving and sharing. And, these are very basic things that we learn in preschool, aren't they? Like, we care and we share. But, a lot of the decisions that get made in everyday life don't necessarily embed these at the core. So if we really embed this at the core of everything every decision that we make and every way that we show up, that we have this regenerative approach, we're deeply respectful, and we engage in a reciprocity, I think it will shift a lot of things. And part of this reciprocity is something that is deeply inspired by awareness of how Indigenous cultures and traditional sustainable cultures have worked forever. And so I think what permaculture also helps us to do is to show up in a way that we can more deeply listen to nature and more deeply listen to ancient regenerative cultures, and to hear about these kin-centric obligations that we have to place and to people and to community, to land, to water. And it's a different paradigm from which we come from. And I think this is at the heart, and it flows so beautifully with what permaculture talks about. And this is Wurunga, who I spent a lot of time talking with. He's an elder from the Port Macquarie area, and he lives up this way. So I spend a lot of time with him. And it's really this notion of this kin-centric obligation and shifting our perception. And he talks a lot about how Indigenous Australian culture is actually the first permaculture. And I love that he frames it in that way, because what it does, it helps me to understand too, and to feel confident about speaking up about permaculture, because it builds from, it stands on the shoulders of, it supports this Indigenous way of knowing, and is deeply in a place of learning from and learning with and shaping a new bioregional kin-centric way of moving forward. So, you can look at all of this and go, oh my gosh, okay, so what's going on? Often we get left wondering what's going on, because there is so much, and it's all too much to land in our worlds, in our daily life. And quite often we feel like it's easy to sort of stick our heads in the sand and go, it's all right, it's going to be okay, let's just move on and someone else will sort it out. And the thing is that there are so many people who are working on this, and that's something to feel good about, that there are so many people who do care, who are actually stepping up and making a difference. I think it's easy to flick up and say, oh, nobody cares, and it's just easy to go with that flow. I actually don't agree with that. I think most people care. I think most people actually really do care in a deep way. And I think if we start to accept the trouble that we're in, but then wonder, how can I be contributing meaningfully in this ethical, just, and non-violent way? What's the way that I can show up every day in a way that I feel like, oh, yeah, okay. Because I think this is what helps us to address the fear, the mourning, the loss, the anxiety, all of those things. When we feel that we're part of something much larger than ourselves, when we feel like we're part of a movement for positive change, when we feel like someone else gets what it is that we're worried about and that we're talking about, and I feel like, oh yeah, this is important, and I can go to work and I can do whatever I do in the day, but I can show up in a way that I feel like I'm contributing meaningfully. So you'll notice at the top here that I've started to put in some of the principles of permaculture, and I'm not going to talk about them. They're just there in the background, but they're kind of the frame. So the permaculture principles are the frame for what I'm about to start talking about now. And this idea that really the place to begin is in this noticing, is breathing, like breathing in, breathing out. Remember to breathe out. Like we start to take so many breaths that we start to get a little bit hyperventilating. Like, let's breathe out again and pause. There's something, a wonderful philosopher, Bayo Komolafe, and I put in the link to his work here, an incredible philosopher. He says, times are urgent, let us slow down. He's not talking about actually stopping and slowing down and doing nothing about it, not caring. That's totally not what he's talking about. He says the idea of slowing down is not about getting answers. It's about questioning our questions. So taking the time to pause and think, okay, what is this all about? Where is it going? How can I show up? And so I think this phrase, the time's urgent, let us slow down, really points to this slow and small solutions, observe and interact and noticing, being in a state of noticing, being aware, like really opening up our lens to be able to see what's happening around us, to be sensitive. You know, often we become desensitized to things that are going on, and it's easy to do that. You know, we open up too much news and we become desensitized. So let's allow ourselves to be sensitive, to notice, to pause, and to really breathe in and out. And that helps us to land and ground ourselves in a way that we can actually stand strong. You know, I think if we allow ourselves to pause enough and feel kind of rooted where we are, you know, we can start, like, this sounds like I'm using the tree as a metaphor, like we can actually start to sway because we're deeply rooted, we're grounded, we're strong. And then, you know, as things come, we can move with it and flow with the changes that are happening. And one of the really important ways in which we can do this is by connecting with other people. Like, this is a we task. This is not a me task. It's not you or me that are taking this on. This is about us. It's we together connecting. So integrating rather than segregating. Together, we can stand tall. And if we're all standing tall and standing strong and deeply rooted where we are in place and community and facing this together, we have a possibility of actually bringing about the change. And I think too, a really other important thing is to be in conversation. So conversing with the world around us, conversing with our friends and our family and our neighbors and our workmates, and not being afraid to actually say something about this. You know, often I found in all of the decades that I've been doing this, people quite often feel a little bit relieved when you mention stuff. Think, oh yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but that really worries me too. And you hold a space where these kind of conversations can happen and where you can uncover that underlying ripple that's going on, which is affecting everything that's going on in your daily life, but you're not talking about it. So just cracking open a few more layers and allowing that to come through. So it really helps you to sort of harvest new possibilities, to share new ideas, to share perspectives, and to gain a deeper or broader perspective than what you had before. And I really love the work that Nora Bateson does. And she talks a lot about this, that, you know, the problems that face us in the world are really that of perception, of perspective. And actually a shift in perspective is action. Often we feel like we have to be doing. But actually we can shift our perspective and shift our perspective together. That itself, because it shifts how we show up, like I said before. And you might have noticed that I'm using a lot of ing words, like there's a little note down the bottom here. Why I'm doing this is because I think it's important to really focus. This is from a sort of a systemic perspective, like looking at, rather than just focusing on this or that, but what's going on in between? What's the relationship between all of these things? And focusing on the processes and connecting and engaging. It's a doing word, but being as well is also an ing. It's so really focusing on verbs. So you'll notice that I'm using a lot of ings. You'll notice that. I also really, and the reason I put this in really big letters is because I don't want you to be afraid of taking leadership. And that doesn't mean you have to stand up on the top of a stage and, you know, change things. But you can You can lead through very simple actions, by simple things that you say, or different ways that, rather than reacting, how you respond. And so, this, I think, you can lead too by opening up a conversation, inviting people to participate in something. It can be a very gentle leadership, but I think the more that every single one of us who are kind of getting this just shows up with that permission to be a leader. And to really focus on this idea of perspective, and to zoom in and zoom out. And from a permaculture principles perspective, this is like from patterns to details. Often we can get caught on our little niche and our little corner and just do that. And I think it's really important to step out and to see how other people are addressing the issues that we're concerned about, because we have our perspective, but that's just such a little slice of the pie. How are all the other ways of showing up? And so another way that I would think about this is often we're looking at, maybe what's happening in our garden this season, or might be what's going on, in the next couple of years. But what's the long view? And so I think permaculture, when we're thinking about permanent culture, this is about taking the long view. How are we thinking about how we might be able to contribute to actually the sustainability of humanity, of life on this planet, this long view. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and you may well know this author, Professor Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who wrote that beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And I know many of you have read it. I know many of you told me this. And this is sort of part of the shifting perception that I really heard from her, and I love this, so I wanted to share it with you. So how can we live in a way that the land might be grateful for us? And I just would love to hear how that landed with you. I'm going to say it again. How can we live in a way that the land may be grateful for us? Now, I don't know about you, but as a teenager, I remember feeling so disappointed with humanity, like just thinking, oh my gosh, what are we doing? We're destroying forests, we're polluting the rivers, we're causing, we're sort of producing nuclear warheads, we're doing all this stuff. And just to feel like we're this blight on the planet and somehow separate from it. But what Robin Wall-Kimmerer's work is really saying is, like, we are nature. And if we start to shift it from us seeing ourselves as being this problem, but actually thinking, well, how can we show up in a way that the land is really grateful that we're here? How is it that we're tending the land? How is it that we're the carers? What is our role as part of country, not separate from it? And there's a lot of conversation too about even the word nature kind of puts us nature over there and us over here. It's like really weaving the threads back together again. So I really love that. If you get a chance to listen to any of her, Robin Wall-Kimmerer's podcast, read her book, or listen to audiobooks, I highly recommend it, because her shift in perspective that she brings, I think, is essential to how we can show up. And so once we start to have that shift in perspective, like, we really need to start practicing it, because it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way. Like, since our birth, we've been wired by everything that we've heard in the media, in school, in our cultures. But in order to shift into a different perspective, we need to start to practice that. We practice different language, experiment with it, and demonstrate it, share it, show it, play with it. Don't get too attached to it, because it's a practice, so be in the state of practicing the practice of showing up. And as often as you can, to be engaging in the seeding of this in other places. So it may be sort of scattering ideas or offering possibilities of people to be engaged. So what are those possibilities that you're discovering or engaging with, or inspire you? What are the actions that you're doing? And get involved in some kind of exchange to help to scatter those ideas, sprinkle them, perhaps even, don't have to scatter them, or just offer a small handful to someone that you might think will take that and use and value that diversity of ideas in order to see something new where they are. And I think another concept that is really important and central to the permaculture concept is this, that of respecting water. And we really do need to think about how we can tend to this life-giving flow. Without water in the landscape, without the flow of water, we are actually not going to be supporting life on this planet. And so this, in terms of that noticing, pausing, watching, breathing, being, notice what's going on with water in your place, in your landscape. What's happening with it? Is there an issue with it? What is going on? Understand the dynamics of it. And this could be a broad pattern, or it could be something that's just very localized. So notice it, that zoom in, zoom out, get the different perspective on what's happening with water in your place. Because at the heart of permaculture, if we can get this part noticed well, then we can start to shift so many different things. And then we can start to think about the slow it, spread it, sink it, store it, but watch it first. Really be in that noticing of the permaculture principle of being in watering. And the other one is soiling. Now, this word soiling is something that's kind of a dirty word, isn't it? If you hear someone's soiling them, like you just think, ugh. But it's actually one of the most important things that we can be doing. So how can we be making soil? Like, this is one of the roles that humans can have. We can help to accelerate the process of making soil through our actions. So if we can show up with the concept of being someone who's making and tending to soil, as opposed to being participant of the soil degeneration project, that is going to make a difference. So I think, this shift in perspective is really around how can we be a soil maker and a soil tender to really tend to the aliveness of the soil. And this, with that watering, is the basis for thriving life on Earth and thriving of humanity. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can be, and I know there's people on this call from anywhere around the world that, the watering and the soiling, I can't imagine that we can have a thriving life without tending to these things. And so another part is this fooding, too often we take for granted where the food is coming from. And we've seen over the last few years, whether it be through, COVID lockdowns, whether it be through droughts or floods or whatever it might be, that there's been a massive disruption in the system and there's a rise in costs of food. So what are the ways that we can learn to predominantly grow and source our food as locally as possible and support local regenerative food systems that are also doing the watering and the tending to soil and all of those things? So, wherever you are, what are the ways that you can incorporate more simple food systems in and around your place? Now, I think a really important part that I love about the permaculture approach too is it's not necessarily thinking, okay, I have to grow, the cabbages, tomatoes, the zucchinis, whatever. It's like, what are all the foods that exist in these thriving and dynamic edible landscapes that have a life of their own? And tending to that can help to unlock the potential and possibility for abundance where you are, based on top of the really noticing your water flows and your soil flows. Now, this one here, I think, is also, so we talked about soiling, watering, fooding, but homing. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about this notion of home. Now, many of us are in a constant state of transition, moving from one place to another, whether that be forced or chosen. There is probably more refugees on the planet than there ever have been before. How do we tend to this place called home? Now, sometimes this home can be a place that we have. Other times it might be a bioregion. Sometimes if we don't actually have deep connections to a place, perhaps that homing is thinking about, well, our planetary home. Like, I wonder, what do you feel is like your home? Like, if you were to tend to your home, where is that? At what scale do you feel like, oh yeah, this is home? And I'm bumping up to the edges of the English language, trying to describe the feelings that home means to me. You know, home is a place that nourishes me. But what does that mean? Like, it's a place where I feel connected. It's a place where I feel like I understand the systems and I'm part of the systems. It's a sense of like, I know where the food's coming from and I can read the landscape. I can understand the influences and the flows that are happening. And by homing, what it means is actually really paying attention to that stuff. It's about being a bioregional being or a local being, like wherever you are, to really get to know that. And I think this is like at the core part of permaculture too, that, you know, all the site analysis that those of you doing the PDCs, the permaculture design certificate course, like that's what this is about. It's about really understanding the place in which you are so that you're able then to interact and connect and to add value to that. And so homing for me is a really important place. And it's not about the house, you know, like let's just say that. When I was having a conversation with one of the local, like a young Indigenous guy here, really incredibly wise young man that I met recently. And I was saying, I'm looking for a word that describes this. Have you got a word, you know, because I just don't have one in English. And he says, well, and he told me what it was. And for the life of me, I didn't have a pen with me and I need to go and ask him again. But he did say, basically it translated as home. And I kind of said to him, but that couldn't be it. That couldn't be it. Because in my mind, trained from a Western perspective, at that time I was thinking home being house, home being, you know, this place that is a thing. Whereas what he's talking about is a process, a set of relationships, how you relate to your place, how you belong, how you connect with other people, who were the ancestors in the place and what's coming. Like there was all these other dimensions that were held in this word that he told me that weren't held in my concept of what home was because of, you know, my frame of reference. And so I think this is a really, really interesting thing to play with. And so I started going on all these journeys in my exploration. Okay, well, what's my Indigenous culture? Where am I from? Like I'm from Australia, or I'm born in Melbourne on the, you know, on the banks of the Mullen, not far from there. Like I know that place, but what's my ancestral history? So I started going, what are the words from there? And I found a few words that I thought were really interesting that started to describe this. So this is Dulcas in Scottish, which is really this sense of home, this unity between land, nature, people, and culture. And then in Welsh, there's, which is also part of my ancestry, which is this Cynefin, this place that feels like home and where we belong. So there's words in other cultures that have this meaning, but we've kind of filtered them out because they've had no place in our industrialized society. It doesn't really serve us to have those words, those deep connective place words. And as I was searching too, I would also find like words that would describe the sound of the leaves ruffling as a bird took flight. Like there's a word for that. We need those words again. And I wonder if you have any words that you know of that from your language, from your Indigenous culture, from your ancestral roots, or from something in your contemporary language that you use that has these sort of deep languaging possibilities of reconnecting. And also just going back to Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's been relearning the language of the I'm going to give this a try, the Potawatomi Nation. And so she was talking about how there's different pronouns even. There's pronouns for beings of the world, for nature beings. And so, for example, a tree, the pronoun for a tree is aki. So instead of saying the tree is over there and it is something, it's like aki. Like it has a pronoun. It's not just an it. It's not a thingity thing that you can disconnect. It's part of the process. And the plural for that word is kin. It's part of our kinship. The trees are part of our life and part of our ecosystem. And then I love this word that she also shared, which was papawi. It's like the force that causes mushrooms to push up from the earth overnight. And so what she's doing there is speaking of the unseen energies that animate everything. And these are the kind of words that describe emergence, like our scientific language that we use for emergence and myceliation and all that kind of thing. There's words in Indigenous cultures far before any of these scientific words for it. And I would love to hear more of those. I think it's such a beautiful way to start to understand and reconnect and to share that. Like, isn't that fascinating to hear these different words from different cultures in different places talking about this deep connection? And it may help us to reconnect with place if we understand that this was in our language all along. And it's just something we've recently forgotten about because the paradigm changed. And in order to shift the paradigm and our perspective to a more ecological civilization, a more ecocentric, a more kin-centric way of being, that perhaps these are the sorts of words that we need to start to reweave back into what we're saying. And so, any of you who have been part of any of the sessions that I've run before, you must have heard me talk about, myceliating, and I'm always grasping for different words to explain things. And so the word, myceliating for me is about this idea about how can, from where we are in our home, in our place, in the places that we can show up, myceliate different possibilities, different ways of understanding. And often it's in the unseen world. And so we can use this language of nature, how we understand it, whatever language that we have, to explain different ways that change happens. Like, so this is my theory of change. Instead of trying to, change the political structure and challenge and fight and do this, like, I think a lot of the change can happen, and particularly this is what permaculture has taught me, and connecting with the garden and connecting with Indigenous cultures taught me, that's actually connecting with the ground and connecting with nature. And when we start to tend to this myceliating force, like we add compost to the soil and the mycelium starts to grow, it starts to feed all of the living systems in there, which then in turn support us, and it continues to grow. We're going to talk about myceliating ideas. And what I notice is that you don't have to scratch the surface very far wherever you are in the world. Like I said before, like permaculture and concepts like permaculture are all around the world. You don't have to scratch very far to find these ideas, these words, these concepts, these ways of being, these ways of showing up in our homes and our communities. And this is part of that myceliating web of possibilities. It's everywhere. And you don't have to change the world. You just need to tend to your part of the world, wherever it feels like that's your home, and really pay attention to that. And I think that's being part of this myceliating web. You don't have to do it all, just where it feels like you can. And that is so empowering. We're part of this complex web of life. And all we need to do is to tend to the bit that we're in. So we don't need to go out and fix, like I said, like it's not like fixing the problems and changing everything. We just need to tend. And so even that slight nuance in language can really help us to feel differently about it. So instead of, fixing bits and, doing a patchwork, a bit over here and a bit over there, we're really trying to take a whole systems perspective and feel how we're connected to the whole, and that we're tending to our part and myceliating the possibilities. So, I think as much as possible, when we start to have these conversations, to share it as far and wide as we possibly can. If we start to learn something, share it with someone else, but take the time to listen and hear what comes back in return. And so this reciprocity, we all have as much to learn from each other, from different ways of knowing, from different languages, from different concerns, different impacts, like what is going on in the world. And so deeply being part of this, constantly sharing on the knowledge, finding ways that we can pass it on. And, also part of the fair share is this notion of giving, like part of the reciprocity. Like, I think it's really, I don't know, this is kind of how I've tried to show up in the world since the beginning of my permaculture career, is like always give first. Like, just trust that if you give out into the world, like the reciprocity will be there. And so often there's, and the more that this has happened, if you notice where there's places where it might be more appropriate to give and might be more impactful to give, or it might be more needed to give. And so really noticing that. So I think, you all will notice that wherever you are, in your home, in your world, in your community, and what moves you, and really feel capable of going, yeah, well, I do have capacity to actually give back, or to share something first, or to pass something on. Where is that? I wonder, like, what is it that you feel like gives you the capacity to do that? So let me just come back into this. So what we need to do through a permaculture lens is to design systems to be resilient and robust with local and bioregional cohesiveness. So essentially that's what permaculture is about. How can we create systems that are resilient and robust, and really focusing on tending to what's here in the place where we are? It's not taking a sort of a one whole sweeping design and applying it everywhere, like being really localized. We need to design systems too that enrich relationships. And it's in this interconnectedness, it's in that wealth of relationships that we find the real security. That's where it lies. Not in accumulating, it's by having as much flow and connectivity and relationship as possible. That's where the real wealth and security lies. And as things unravel in the world and there's things going on, the more the richness of our relationships that exist and the more deeply connected we are, the more robust and resilient we will be. And so this is a real call out to be part of this myceliating permaculture community of both local and global positive practivists responding to the changes that we see in the world. And really to take a breath and to allow nature and our gardens to be, our teachers in life. Everything gardens and everything has a possibility of being a teacher to us. And I love this picture. Thank you to, I think it's Stacey and Chrissy and Emma who helped to get this picture. This was drawn by one of the young Perma Youth members from Naka Valley Refugee Settlement. And I love this picture because it's shifting, it's talking about a different point of view. Like this is the point of view of the soil. This is the soil's perspective. I wonder what the soil, when you look at the soil, I wonder what the soil's looking back at you thinking. And how can you be in that state of taking that perspective and shifting it? And the longer I garden, the longer I realize that, through a permaculture way, the longer I realize that I'm actually the garden gardening. I'm like less of enforcing my will, but just being in that noticing state. Oh, this is happening. So I can tend a bit here and I tend a bit there, and I'm a tender. And so I'm the garden gardening. And this, I want to come back to that quote that that Robin Wall Kimmerer talked about. I put this before. It's like, how can we live in a way that the land might be grateful for us? And so that's kind of what I'm talking about here. And to recognize too that this is one of those famous quotes in permaculture, that it is really, it's a revolution, evolution disguised as gardening. And often we feel like, oh, it's just gardening. But actually, there's so much to learn in the garden. There's so much transformation that can take place in communities through garden by side-by-siding. I've been talking to people recently who work a lot with young lads in trouble, for example. And by being in the garden, not talking at each other, but side-by-siding, they can sort out their problems. And, like there's so many different dimensions, from our ecological dimension to our inner dimensions. And I think this is important in our perspectives too. I've talked about, sort of the long view and the close view and different perspectives, but it's also the internal view and our external view and how we negotiate that as well. And the group that I mentioned right at the start, that we get together and we have these chats all the time, one of them just said this, and it just stuck with me. She said, what we've got to remember is like, no one wants to create a crap world. Like, really, they don't. Like, you don't set out to do that. You don't set out to do that. It's just that the decisions and the frames and all these other things that wrap it around thwart our possibilities to make good decisions. So show up with love and kindness. Like if someone's doing something you think is wrong, rather than attacking, wrap them in more context, wrap them in more understanding, show kindness that then could open up a possibility for new understandings. And I also wanted just to share this little slide, because I used to think that, we really need to change. We really need to get more political will to make all these changes happen. And I thought the political will was actually the politicians. That's not, is it? It's you and me. It's you and me. We are the people making the political changes through our everyday decisions and how we show up. And it's everyday practical actioning that make the difference. So you could be focused on education or health or soil or local economy or rights of nature or community or mental health. You all have different perspectives, all coming together. If we can start to have this cohesive idea that this is all for one planet living, this is all for well-being, it's for regeneration, then this is the political will. When we see ourselves as actually something a lot, that we are together rather than as little items, separate. Sorry, I'm just getting a few notices on the screen. So the question then is, how do we create a world that we want? Well, by living it every day, showing up with this local action, simultaneously showing up a bit and connecting wherever you are. And so just to summarize those 5 reasons why I think the world needs more permaculture. One, everything is changing. There's a massive gap at the moment between the vision and the reality of what we want. It's not business as usual, and it's not going to be. Things are changed. Things are going to continue to change. Things are going to get worse. It's going to be bumpy. We need this regeneration, respect, and reciprocity, and really accept the invite to be part of this and to invite others to be part of it too. And as much as possible, teach permaculture. Now, I don't mean you all have to get out and start teaching PDCs, but you can show up one-on-one, maybe with your children, maybe in workplaces. You could run little classes. You might invite guests to your place, wherever you get the opportunity to share these perspectives, and not to try and hit each other over the head with these perspectives, not force someone into it, but to open a conversation with this gentle noticing, listening, tending, caring. And so, yeah, I wonder how it is that you might translate these ideas and share it for you where you are. I also invite you to come along to any of the conversations that we have. So whether it be a masterclass or maybe our permaculture film clubs that happen every month. I've got a weekly podcast where I talk to people around the world thinking about these ideas. So tune into those and have a listen to different perspectives on this. It's called Sense Making the Changing World. So how are we to live? So that's available. And more of these monthly masterclasses. There is a whole archive and you can tune into, but you can come and join in. The next one that's coming up will be with this wonderful guest, James Campbell, who is the author of this children's book, Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet. And it's basically a permaculture book wrapped in humor. And so I'd love you to come along to this. And also to engage young people in whatever it is that you're doing. So I run this thing called the Ethos Fellowship. I have a group of people from around the world who come in and explore permaculture and systems thinking together, and leadership, regenerative leadership skills. Like, I'm sure there's young people around you that you could take under your wing and to start to open up these conversations. I don't think there's enough of it that happens in our school systems, in the conversations that young people are exposed to. So I wonder what that could look like. And we also have a whole lot of different courses as well. And many of you here are part of those courses. And if you're interested in finding out more about them, there's this link you can scan here, or just look at Permaculture Education Institute.org.courses. And we have something called Hive and lots of different conversations that happen there all the time. So a place to really tease out what this all means. And coming up soon too is a Permaculture Business Lab, and this program is really designed to try and find out how you can not just do this as your hobby, but how can you actually cultivate a permaculture business or propagate a permaculture business doing this. So if you'd like to find out more about that, please get in touch. So how? Like, I'd love to spend the last 5 minutes maybe just breaking out into groups, and then we can just come back. So we've got 5 minutes left. So maybe we'll drop out into groups for maybe, let's just say 4 minutes. Like, this is a very short breakout room. What is it about communicating the need for permaculture? Like, how is it that you can share these ideas where you are? What sticks? What kind of languaging? What kind of sharing? So maybe if you could just each say 1 or 2 sentences about how you feel like you can show up and share this where you are. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes. If you'd like to stick it and just drop in and hear what some other people have got to say, I think this is really important. This is part of the listening and the sharing. So yeah, what is it that sticks with you in terms of how you feel like you could show up and talk about this and open up a new conversation that kind of gently pushes the boundaries of what's possible? All right, welcome back. That was a very short moment of time, I understand, but I really wanted to just drop that question there. And I know that we've gone over time, but I would love if you feel to stay just to have a little bit of reflection on that. Is there anything that was starting to be talked about in that group that you would like to share in terms of ways in which you can show up and communicate this and find ways to attract people? If you have a possibilities of popping your hand up, we could maybe just take 1 or 2 comments or thoughts around that. And I'd love to hear from you in the chat too about just any reflections that you have on the things that we've talked about tonight. Like, maybe you might not put your hand up, but what's landed with you about the things that we've explored in this session today? Feel free to chat there. Martha, go ahead. Hi, Martha.
No, it was so wonderful. I had a really lovely, really quick, short, intense chat. But so I've mentioned a couple of times that my focus is on fibers and how we can bring fibers and plant fibers, animal fibers into food systems, because they originally were part of food systems. And coming from the clothing industry that is so, in many ways, so evil and destructive, actually, when we cultivate fibers locally, it's really healing for the earth and for the planet. And then from there, people come together to knit, to sew, to spin, to break the flax, as we've been doing, or to repair, So I think it doesn't really matter what you do. Just start something. If there's a local space in the church basement, just organize a mending session, and it's amazing how much knowledge there is in the community, especially with older people who don't think that what they know is so special, but it is. People who know how to knit. And with kids today, they're not learning that anymore in school. So if you don't have land, you don't have a garden, there's certainly some place somewhere where you can start getting people together. And if you have land, all the better.
And, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's exactly right. Whatever it is that you have to show up, like, it's that permission to be a leader. I think often we go, oh, that couldn't be me because I'm not the most brilliant expert at this. It's like, you don't need to be. You just need to be able to sort of get 1 or 2 other people and catalyze something, and that something may or may not lead to something else. And if it doesn't lead to something else, that's also totally okay as well, because maybe it had, and maybe you don't know. Maybe someone walked past that room and saw you wanting and thought, oh, I'll do that, and went off and did it in the next neighborhood and got another 20 people doing it. And then someone walked past that room, and then that's that myceliation. You don't know. It's just about showing up in a way that sends out those ripples of intent in a way that can bring about the kind of change that we want to see in the world. Yeah. So one more thoughts. Thank you so much, Martha. Yeah, wonderful. Any other thoughts? Flo, go ahead.
Just a quick thing. For me, everyone knows that I was working in people know that I was working in children's garden last year, and I just said just then, oh yes, I was involved in children's garden, and I was away 2 weeks ago, and they ripped the whole thing out, and everyone's like, oh no, and yeah, it sounds awful, but do you know what come out of it is the sunflowers had died, and they passed all the seeds around. So for me, I felt that's what I was going to do anyway. So for me, it achieved some of my goals. It's a shame some of it didn't get chopped and dropped, but we're getting there. We're getting something out of it. And that to me is like part.
But you know what? Also,
Yeah.
you know, each one of those children who had that interaction with you in that time of enjoying that lovely time in the garden with you and that positivity that you brought whenever you were out with them, that's taken away. You can't kind of measure that. You can't, it's like, it's really hard to kind of measure the impact you're having when you show up with such love and enthusiasm. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind as well. Often we think, oh, that project failed, that didn't work, but yet, you know, you never really know. And yeah,
I feel I got so much out of it. So yeah, and this is what I'm meaning. Just keep on going, keep on trying.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, thank you everyone for being here today. It's been a delight having your company, and I'm glad that you had a chance just to have a little brief chat, and I loved reading all the comments. You can, if you'd like to, save the chat. All you need to do, if there's any links in there that you think you wanted to have a look at or read through the comments, in the box where you type, there's 3 little dots. If you click on the dots, there's a little spot where you can save your chat. So feel free to go ahead and do that. I will also be making a recording of this and including the chat in there too. And feel free, when you get that, to share it with anyone you think might be interested in having a listen to. This is a public commons, these masterclasses, and I'm really happy for you to share them with anyone. We do have another session coming up, and this is just for Australians, I'm sorry, at this time because of the licensing agreement. But we have a fantastic session coming up on Thursday, on the 29th, on our leap day. It is an Australian preview screening of 6 Inches of Soil, a new documentary that's just come out of the United Kingdom. And I'll be joined by Satish Kumar, who was the founder of Schumacher College, and he's like a peace pilgrim, and he's a soil advocate and editor of the Resurgence magazine, an incredible human. He'll be joining me in conversation afterwards, so please come along to that. The link's in the chat. And our next masterclass, as I said, is with the wonderful James Campbell, author of the children's book. And the next masterclass that's coming up, the next film club coming up in March will be another great film that's come out of Spain, called Alternatives, and the maker of this film. So they're looking at all the different kind of projects that are going on that are myceliate area, the examples, the little beacons of hope. And so that is a great inspiration. So you'll get to come along and get a chance to actually speak with him too. That's on the 18th of March. So I'll send links to you to all of these different things, and I really welcome you to share out invitation to these to anyone who you think might be interested. I'd love to have your company, and thank you to for anyone who was able to donate to come to this session. We were able to gather collectively $578, which is going to immediately go to refugee and village community permaculture projects for women and youth. So thank you to everyone. That will be out as soon as it drops in my account. So I think it takes 24 hours for it to drop into my account, the Ethos Foundation account, our charity, and then it will swoosh across to the other side of the world. So thank you everyone who was able to donate. I really appreciate that. All right, take care everyone. Have a wonderful day and evening, wherever you're calling in from, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye.